Welcome to the Powerhouse Project, a podcast empowering and celebrating women, and more importantly, an opportunity to share our stories. I'm your host, Lisa Laronde. Today, I'm excited to welcome Meg Mathes, a Red Seal refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic, a journey person, and a gas fitter. Meg, thank you so much for joining us today. I was just thinking about when I heard you speak at the OGCA, the Ontario General Contractors Association, and KWIC, the Canadian Association of Women in Construction, and how impressed I was with you and how some of your stories were just so inspiring. And I know that and how much of an advocate you are for, people in the trades. And you've worked and volunteered in Alberta. And I've always found it interesting that the Alberta stats for women in the skilled trades has been the highest in the country. And I'd like to come back to that point, hopefully today, so that maybe you can give me some insights of why you think that is, or maybe things that we can do in Ontario to be able to model that. But let's start with how you actually first became involved in the trades.
Yeah, I have a bit of an interesting story. I left home at 14 years old, so a little bit earlier than many folks, and I had to work to support myself. So I found employment at Burger King. Because I could work whatever hours and whatever shift, I ended up on the night shift. And at the end of the night, when we were done with everything, we would clean all the equipment, and that's when we'd usually find something wrong with it. So my instruction was to call the repair company, but I've always had a very mechanical mind, and I found myself trying to fix things myself. So the repair company found me as a bit of a threat and a bit of an opportunity, and they offered me a job in the skilled trades, and I took it.
Oh, that's exciting. You left home at 14?
At 14, yes.
And wow, did you live on your own, or how does that work?
So when I left home at 14, I part of it was to do with my gender identity and me exploring it and trying to talk to someone about it. And I didn't feel safe with my family. So I wasn't able to work through that with them. And I ended up being in the psych ward. So I was in psychiatric care for about 6 months, and we started talking about my gender identity, and they were recommending some pretty strong things like shock therapy, like conversion therapy, and I just got really worried. So I ended up saying, it's just a cry for attention. I hid it all away again, and I said I was just acting out, and after that, I ended up being in foster care for 6 months, and then I was 15, almost 16, old enough to work. So I found employment at Burger King and lived on my own.
Wow, that's incredible. So you are an open transgender woman and an advocate. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey?
Yes, absolutely. So my journey, I knew that I was transgender. I didn't know that was a term, but I knew that I was transgender about by the age of 5. I tried to come out several times, like around 10 years old, again at 14, again at 18, again at 30, and finally did when I was 41. When it all came down to it, I was driving home with my spouse from a Father's Day event oddly enough on Father's Day. And I came out to my spouse while we were driving in the car. And it was really challenging. It was that fight, flight, or freeze moment where I just felt all this pressure, What do I do? I need to be authentic to myself. I need to figure this out. I've spent my whole life hiding this and masking this, and I need to figure out what it all is. So I came out to my spouse on Father's Day in 2020, and then to my children later on that year in the fall, and started making plans to come out socially, like publicly and professionally, as a transgender woman. And I did that on March 12th of 2021. So lots of people said to me, like, why now? And why did you wait? If you waited so long, why do it now? Why not just carry on? But it was just that drive that I needed to be authentic. I needed to be real to myself. And above all else in the world, I needed to walk this line and see what it's all about.
And I think it's so important. I think it's so important that we share our stories and our journeys so that people understand that you're not alone, and And I think it's interesting. I didn't realize it was, so it's only been 3 years, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
so
just had my
do you
3-year anniversary.
that's awesome. Congratulations. Do you feel like you're treated differently now in your
Uh,
workplace?
Yes, actually, that was one of the biggest surprises to me, and it happened right away. It was a Friday when I announced to everyone at work that I was transgender, and on Monday when I came back to work as Megan, um, the very first meeting I was in, it's just stereotypical behavior. I went from being listened to being talked over in the meeting. I went from, you know, having my opinion count and be valid to people questioning it, and another a gentleman actually picked up on one of my suggestions and used it as his own right afterwards, and I was just floored. I'm like, I can't believe I had like all three of these things happen in one go in one meeting on my first day.
That's hysterical. I tell the story all the time about being in the boardroom, and I don't think people understand. So it's very nice. I mean, it's unfortunate that you actually experience that, but it's nice because sometimes I think, that situation in the boardroom where someone takes your exactly what you just said and says exactly the same words is shocking to me that happens. And my comment back was, you must like the sound of your own voice, because you said exactly what I just said. And I had an executive coach who had said, obviously, there's got to be better ways to say that. When I said, the problem is everybody around the table then thinks that behavior is okay.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we need to stop. And I know that it's not an intentional thing. It's not like you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to over talk, any women that I encounter in
No.
the day. But it's so interesting how it happens. It just so happens so quickly. And the fact that it happening to you is, I think it actually makes me laugh that it's not like
Yes, me
you're
too.
not a different person. Your ideas are all the same. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's incredible. So did you feel supported by your employer at the time?
Well, it was a bit of a mix. So, three out of the first four people I told about, came out to them and told them that I'm planning to transition. Three out of the four shared it with someone else without my permission. So that made me pretty gun shy in early days, that I couldn't trust them with disclosure. Um, and then I ended up having a chat with our CEO, Brad, and he really assured me, he told me that I have his support and that he will do everything he can to try and help support me in this process in the organization. And he said, I hope that the organization will support you. I'm going to do everything I can to guide that, but I hope that we can demonstrate that to you as well. And so that really meant a lot to me, knowing that right from the top I was supported, and there wouldn't be tolerance for inappropriate behavior.
I know when we did our Equity 101 training, one of the things he said, I've been actually trying to see if I can find the stat, and I can't, but they were saying that the number one employment for transgender men is construction. And he was saying, if you don't think you have a transgender person within your organization, in your construction organization, you're wrong. And that just means that you haven't provided a safe enough environment that they feel comfortable enough coming out to that.
Yes.
So do you know, is that accurate?
Yeah. I would assume that's very accurate. I don't know for sure, but transgender people in Canada make up 0.24% of the population, so it's like a quarter of a person. So at Modern Niagara, we have about 3,000 employees. So there's maybe 7 individuals in our organization who could be transgender statistically. I don't know of any other than myself. So it just shows how small the population is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Are there lots of support associations available?
There's a really great organization here in Calgary called Skipping Stone Foundation, and that's what they're centered all around, is transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, and supporting them from childhood right up through to adulthood. And they've actually done a lot of work nationally to help support transgender folks right across Canada.
That's awesome. So you've done a lot of advocacy and some volunteer work
Yeah.
across Canada. And is that where you started early on? Obviously, that you if you struggled, I guess, for so many years, what would have helped you throughout that time period?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've When I look back, I've always had two driving passions in life, and one is to help people, and the other one is to always keep learning. So I need to keep upgrading my skills and knowledge, and I always need to be doing something that's helping others. And I think in the absence of being able to be my true self and show up that way in the world, I always tried to be the best version of myself that I could be,
Yeah.
And that's really what it was all about for me. If I tried to be kind and tried to keep growing and learning, I figured then, what could people say of me? And if they ever found out the truth about me, I hope that they would see that I was the same person before that I am now. I just look a little different.
Yeah. Really. And what should that matter? I don't
Yeah.
understand why that has any bearing on our conversations. So these obviously are very tough conversations to have. So how do you balance between advocating for transgender rights, but also maintaining like your privacy and enforcing your
Mm-hmm.
own boundaries? Because I think that must be a difficult balance.
Yes. Um, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this.
Oh, you are. I do it all the time.
But yeah, so um, oh,
Oh, sorry. That's me. Sorry.
no worries. So sorry, I think I need the question again.
I just
Lost it.
said, how do you balance between being an advocate for transgender rights, but also maintaining your privacy and your own boundaries? Because I think that must be very difficult. That it's awesome that you're an advocate, but I would think that at some points you would like to have your own privacy and just live your life the way that you'd like to live it without having to be an example or a role model to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I spent way too much time worrying about what other people felt. So I'm kind of at a point now where I just don't really give a shit anymore. you know,
Yeah, that's good.
I can't be bothered with
Yep.
it, and there's such a lack of authentic representation and transgender voices being listened to out there that I thought, you know what, I feel comfortable in this space, and I'm willing to educate and to share, the questions that come up in people's minds or that pop up into my mind. I like sharing stories about them and sharing some knowledge around it. So I feel quite comfortable doing that, and my advocacy is all based around education. I'm not an activist. I'm not going out and protesting and doing stuff like that. That's just not my style, and that's not what works for me.
Yeah.
But starting off with education and just trying to help people and hearing an authentic transgender voice, I think, is really important. So, but just like with anyone in any situation, there's information that is private, and there's questions that we wouldn't ask. And one of the most common ones that ends up coming up is, so what's in your pants? And that's just as appropriate for someone to ask me as it is for them to ask you, and
Exactly.
it doesn't matter, and it's not important.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I think the more that we talk about it and the more that, we normalize the conversations, I think the easier that it does get for people. So given
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you worked in a predominantly male environment, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Well, a lot of it was centered around knowing that I feel different, and I didn't feel in alignment with my gender that was assigned to me at birth. I really struggled, and it was tough because this is where my skill set was. I found a career in
Yeah.
the skilled trades, and I was really good at it. And I kept, seeing some women around in the industry, but not a whole lot. And I just kept wishing and hoping that someone would go before me. Every company I worked at, I kept, looking in their HR system if I had access to it to see if there was any policy around transgender or gender diverse people and what it would look like to support them coming out. But I never found it. I never found that other person who had the courage to go before me, and so I just had to do it. And I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of male allies, And, I think allyship, as you and I were talking previously, is really important. Minority groups will stay minority groups unless they have allies and allyship to help lift them up and help support them. So I had a tremendous amount of male allies who have supported and helped me along the way, and realized that not a lot is different other than the name, and things look a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly. So just tell me a little bit about your current position as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional for Modern Niagara.
Yeah, so I spent about 12 years out in the field as a tradesperson. Then I spent another 12 years in management positions in the office. And, the opportunity came up. At Modern Niagara, we had a consultant who was helping us to get things off the ground and rolling. And they did some great foundational work to get us started. But they left the organization, and it created an opportunity right at a time when I was kind of looking for what my next career trajectory was going to be. And this opportunity came up to look after diversity, equity, and inclusion at Modern Niagara. And I jumped on it. Our CEO, again, was a little concerned that it could be, now I'm forgetting the word, tokenism.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So our CEO was even concerned about me taking on this role, fearing that it might be a bit of tokenism with me recently having come out as transgender. But I assured him that it's something that I was deeply passionate about, and that I could pour in a lot of my knowledge and experience from being in the skilled trades to this role in the HR side of the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk a lot about that as well, just the tokenism. And I said, you know what, at some point, it's okay to be the token, woman in the room or on the board or whatever, because what happens is we need representation. So it's what you do with it. Sometimes we're given the opportunity because of either what we look like or who we are, but it's what you do with that opportunity. I think that's going to make the difference. So, people have said to me, well, you're just a token woman. I'm like, well, I'm okay. It's what I do with it now. And then maybe the next generation coming up can look at it and say, hey, I can be the CEO of a company. I can be a board member, because they talk about this broken rung, because now we have, as women enter and whether it's in the skilled trades or in leadership roles, what happens is when they get to this age that they're either want to have children, if they so choose to do that, that they come out of the workforce because they either can't stay in the skilled trades, or then they get overlooked in these leaderships. So now you don't have anybody, the next in line coming up into these senior level roles, which is why I think DEI is so important, because we have to look at ways that we can, we're inclusive for everybody, in order for us to, I believe strongly that we'll be more profitable as businesses if we have a diverse workforce, because there's no other way to look at it. I think when you look statistically, if you have women in your executive, you're 30% more profitable than companies that don't. So, that to me says a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And women make up 50.9% of the population in Canada. So they are actually the majority, but still systemically held in a minority position. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Being that token at times, being that person, I'm happy to take that space. I'm the space of one transgender person being here, and I'm happy to take that space.
I think that's awesome. And in women represent 50% of the population, but in skilled trades, we're only representing 5%. And so maybe we can go back to the Alberta question. I know Alberta, I think they were like at 7 or 8%. So why do you think that Alberta has been so successful? I mean, I guess it's not really successful. It's only 7 or 8%, but obviously much higher than the rest of the country. What do you think that they've done differently?
I've had the privilege of working with Alberta Apprenticeship. I actually volunteered with them for 18 years. And held different positions in their grassroots committees that help support the different trades, and then finished off with 6 years as a board member with Alberta Apprenticeship, and having that grassroots involvement where there were committees of the trades workers out in the field and in industry, communicating back to the government about what's going on, what's working, what's not working. I personally believe that that's really helped set things up for success. I got to meet a lot of great women leaders and influential women in the trades who helped support and that narrative, and have gone on to build organizations like Women Building Futures, who is specifically geared towards driving success for women in the skilled trades.
And I know in Ontario now we have women on site, and they've just started to get together once a month, and then it's whether it's 2 people or 40 people. And I think now it's nice that they get to connect with one another. Like you and I were talking a little earlier, is I think we're doing a good job of attracting women into the industry. We're just not doing a very good job at retaining them, and that's because we have to change the culture. And the
Yeah,
only
you're
way to
absolutely
do
right. Unless we change that culture and in the organization, and change the way that women are treated, they will leave at the same rate that they're coming in, and we will never have a net increase. That's why I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are so important. And it's about setting the table and making things safe and supportive for those minority groups so that they can thrive in the organization.
And I think that's why it's important that we share stories, that people understand that the harassment, discrimination, it still exists. I was at the Calgary event last night, and it was the BC. She runs a skilled trades, the CEO for BC, but and now is part of the Canadian Association. And she was saying the same thing. There's harassment, discrimination, and I said we need to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then people think that it doesn't actually exist. Mm-hmm. And in Ontario, there have been no human rights complaints from women for harassment, discrimination in construction sites. And we've started to talk a little bit about that. And they're saying now part of it's our process, is how we handle things. And it goes to mediation, which is great, because you don't want it necessarily to go to court. But then they settle. And when they settle, none of those stats get recorded. And so then you think that you're alone. Or the other example I had was, if you're part of a union and you complain at times, you get put to the bottom of the call-up list. So if this is your job and this is your financial livelihood, what happens with when you're not getting a paycheck, and all you did was complain, or people say, you're difficult to work with, or I don't want to work with her, I don't want to drive with her, because what if I say something that's inappropriate? But I think education is really the key for us to be able to change that narrative, and I really feel like we have to. So your stated mission is to inspire, mentor, and empower the next generation of skilled trades professionals and leaders. So can you just take me through a little bit, like how are you accomplishing that, or what are you doing?
Yeah, I think that's been just a lot of my career from the moment that I got my first journey person certificate in refrigeration. I joined Alberta Apprenticeship in the committees, and I've always worked to try and give back. Looking back on my life, on my experience, not having finished high school and having to get my GED so I could get into the trades and stuff. I had to work really hard to be able to get into the skilled trades. And it's been a wonderful career for me and my family, and provided for most of our things. So I think just representing and giving back, I've always gone to career fairs and tried to have representation and talk to young folks about coming into the skilled trades. University isn't the only path, and talking to young women and their parents who are trying to steer them away from the skilled trades, and show them that things are changing. You don't have to be someone who's big and burly. We use tools and buddy systems to lift equipment and things. Like there's people come in all shapes and sizes, and I've seen all of them in the skilled trades, and it's about that diversity, like you were saying. It increases our performance, it increases problem solving abilities. We have new perspectives, new ideas. The other thing as well is that our clients want to be able to see themselves in the organizations that they choose to partner with. So having diversity in our organization helps support us having a diverse client base as well. So just really focusing on all that. My work right now in DEI, I think, is some of the most meaningful work that's giving back to the next generation of skilled trades professionals. And I couldn't be more excited about the work that I'm currently doing and what's in front of me.
That's awesome. Now, do you think your experience as a transgender woman has influenced your perspective on gender roles and stereotypes?
Oh, very, very much so. And me and my spouse talk about this a fair bit. I'm I think we're kind of fortunate because like me and her never thought of pink jobs and blue jobs and stuff like that. We just always did the job that best suited who we were and what we liked to do, or what we didn't like to do the least. um, but I'm really at a place now where I challenge the gender binary. You know, like if you and I are both women and identify as women, we are both very different in so many ways as well. And you can take the average woman, what is an average woman, what is an average man, and I believe it's sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression are all things that are on like a sliding scale, and people choose to take the pieces that make sense to them and that they identify with, and leave the rest. So I think it's really challenged my perception of all that, and I welcome myself to be challenged by it, because I find, I still have bias. I still
Yep.
have stereotype, and I welcome being challenged on that stuff.
And I think that's really important that people understand. We all have bias, and I tell the story that I was approached if I had 8 women to go in senior leadership roles that could participate in this course, and I was all excited. I said absolutely, and then she said to me how many of them are white, and I was like, oh, they all are. But that's my own bias. It's not, and I tell people it's not like I woke up in the morning and said I'm only going to hire white women. That's not what I said.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, that's what happens. So as long as we can talk about it and recognize that this is part of what we do, we can actually start to correct it. And I think that's why DEI is so important, is we start talking about things that we can start to change, and we can change that narrative, and we can only do that by working together. So how do you think from a society perspective, how can we be more supportive and inclusive of transgender people?
Yeah. I think that's really good. I think it's helpful to recognize that being transgender, it's not a single event where we transition. I've been transitioning my entire life, and until the day I die, I will continue to be transitioning and figuring out what that is. To be transgender means that your gender identity is not in alignment with the sex that you were assigned at birth. So either assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth is the terminology we like to use. But and then being cisgender is another terminology, and that means being in alignment with your gender identity. So just bearing in mind, updating yourself on education, understanding some of the basics of sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, we're not trying to couple those things together. And the acronym LGBT does a poor job of that, because it pulls them all together, where L, G, and B are all sexual orientation, and T is gender identity. So, educating yourself, hearing from authentic transgender voices, I think that's a really big thing that we can do to help normalize the conversation. There's only 0.24% of us, but we exist, and we're out there. And if you're one of my fellow transgender folks out there listening to this podcast, have the courage to stand up and share some of your story as well.
Yeah. I think that's just so important. And I think it's awesome that you're a role model for people. And I really like that you're authentic. I think that's really, really important. And I understand everybody's life journey. There's, struggles, and we have trauma and tragedy. But I think it's so important that we can at least talk about it, so that we know that we're not alone. I know that you'd shared a story with Morgan earlier about a plumber that you had met who was struggling with language. I was wondering if you could share that story with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working on a learning journey for work about microaggressions and microaffirmations. So for those who don't know, microaggressions are small slights against someone. It's crossing the street when there's a person of color walking towards you. It's saying, "Oh wow, you're actually really pretty for a transgender woman." It's stuff like that. They're small slights that typically go unnoticed, but it can be like death by 1,000 paper cuts when they build up over time. And micro affirmations is just the opposite. It's small things that we can say to affirm each other. I call you by your name, Lisa, and that's affirming. I'm using your correct name. You share your pronouns with me, and I use them. That's affirming. So I I pulled together a cohort of individuals from across the organization to run through this training course, and I was soliciting feedback because it's still in development. And I really love the vulnerability and the courage of this individual who gave me feedback, and he said, this. I'm just a dumb plumber, and I said, well, you're a lot more than a dumb plumber, but okay, I'll hear you out. And he says, I am terrified of this topic. I am scared shitless because I know that I have bias. I know that I have stereotype. I know that I'm going to screw up and say the wrong thing, and I'm terrified. I don't want to be in the position and in the situation because I know I'm going to screw up. So, he said, as much as I appreciate you inviting me to this, the whole topic just terrifies me. So that really hit me hard, and it really stuck with me that, again, here is a male individual who wants to be an ally, wants to help support and show that he's open to different ideas and furthering himself, but he's terrified, and I've really taken a focus on that, and sometimes I realize that I'm racing a little bit as I increase my knowledge and I learn more and more. Yep. That the organization and other folks may need to catch up. So it's a good reminder that we're all at a different place, and we need to have patience and understanding and help to educate if you have the time and space to do so.
And when we started on our DEI journey, and I agree with you, I call it a journey. It's not a destination because we're learning every single day. And one of the first things we did was pronouns, and we got a lot. We have businesses in the U.S. and they were saying, do we have to use the pronouns? Like, is this mandatory? And I said, no, it's not mandatory. But let me explain why we're using pronouns. This is about it's about, and I loved your affirmation. So how do you know who I am or how I want to be referred to? Particularly today, when you have names that you can't differentiate now whether it's a woman or man, because we have all these unisex names or just names that we haven't seen before. So it's really hard to put a sex next to it. So I said, first of all, that just takes that. Plus, when you look at people in today's environment, you can't tell now if people are women or men. It's just, it's not like it was in I'm going to say in the old days or whatever. But now it's nice that you can actually say, I can tell you, my pronouns are she, her, they. That's how I would like to be referred to. But if I truly wanted to be he, him, then you should be referring to me as he, him. Like that's my prerogative. That's how I would. It's like saying use my name, which is exactly what you said. Yeah. And then like you're just including people, and then you think about maybe it has no effect on you, or you're comfortable because you're either a cis female or a cis male, or man or woman. Sorry, and then. But maybe other people aren't. So now it makes them go, oh, look at that. You're including me now. I can understand that. And that's what it's this journey. So I think education is just so important, and that we can't, which is exactly what you just said. We has to be a little bit slower introduction to it, so that people understand we're doing this so that we all understand that we can move forward and we can work in this, inclusive, safe environment. How can we provide a more safe environment for transgender people in our work in our workplace? Is there anything that we can do?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that we can do. A couple things that come to mind. Sorry, I'm losing myself here.
I did understand that washrooms was a very important part of that. Yes. To have all gender or gender neutral washrooms.
Yeah. So some ways to help people feel more safe at work and out in society, having, if you're in a position of power or authority, trying to help have gender affirming policies and making sure that gender affirming language is being used, like we talked about with pronouns and stuff. There's a lot of power in that. Sharing your pronouns when you're introducing someone. I've had lots of cisgender folks and allies tell me that they're really uncomfortable with the pronouns. They think it seems foolish and it's not authentic to them to state their pronouns. But I just share with them what you kind of mentioned. Like it opens the door. If I say, hi, my name is Meg Mathes and my pronouns are she and her, it opens the door for you. If you were maybe uncomfortable and you, or if you know that you're the person in the room who is maybe non-binary, maybe looks a little more androgynous, it makes a safe space for you to show up there. Having gender neutral washrooms available is very important. The new building code is recommending that we denote things by like toilet and sink, or toilet, urinal, and sink. Like they're trying to remove the gender from it as well and just state what's in the room. That's what we're going in there for.
Exactly. That's a very good point.
Yes. One other thing that you can do, especially for transgender and gender diverse folks, is looking at gender affirming benefits. A lot of the provinces and territories do cover certain things, but don't cover other things. And I can say that this process has been extremely expensive for me, even with the coverage from the provincial government to help out along the way. So looking at that, looking at leave allowances, if we need gender affirming surgery, we might be out of the workforce for up to 3-4 months before we can return. I think the other really big thing is sexual harassment prevention training, and it should be mandatory and should be required for everyone to participate in a small bit of that, just to open their eyes. And the reason why we're talking about it is because it's still happening, and it's still happening every day on all kinds of job sites. And probably the most important thing that I think you could do at work to help drive safety is, what gets measured gets done. So adding leadership DEI competencies. And I'm not saying like shoot for the skies and tell them that they have to do all these things and learn all these things or else. Yeah. But, join an affinity or employee resource group meeting. Participate in a DEI learning journey. It could be something small like that, just to show that they're making an effort and making a step in the right direction.
That's awesome. So we usually finish off our podcast with the one question is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yes, I talk to young Meg quite frequently with the voice in my own head. And the thing I always say is, don't worry, you'll be okay. It'll be all right. Because I spent so many years, so many moments thinking it wasn't. I tell myself that you'll find a family who loves you, a spouse who loves you, that you can live your authentic life, and that you're lovable and that you're able to love.
That's awesome. That's a very, very nice message. So, Meg, thank you so much for sharing your story with our listeners today. It's so important that we continue to share stories and experiences so that people know that they're not alone on their journey. Please continue to inspire, mentor, and empower the next generation of skilled trades professionals and leaders.
Thank you, Lisa.
You can learn more about today's guest in the show notes and at the powerhouse-project.com. And if you know anyone in the skilled trades who you'd like to be on the show, you can send in a voice note or a message on the website. Follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you so much for listening.